What I think is important tonight is that three older guys may have something to say to the younger generation of architects. That to me is important because otherwise, if we don't say something that's of relevance to you, I think we'd be failing ourselves, failing the city, and failing architecture. And I think it's really important that we try and address the fact that 400 or 500 of you are here tonight. Why are you here? And we better say something relevant or we will lose you. I'm going to briefly, because I don't have a lecture prepared, because we thought we were having a conversation. I also thought I'm in Milano because a book of mine that's just been published by Quod Libet, Manuel Orazzi's publishing house, has just come out. It's downstairs. I thought I was going to sign books. I can't sign 500 books. But after this discussion, somehow I know some of you, because it happened in Rome, will want to sign things. So we will sign things or take pictures or whatever. I know that will happen. But that's part of being here. But I really am very excited about the fact that this book has been published. It's a book of essays that I wrote 40 or 50 years ago. That's the first time translated into Italian. And so I'm going to get a chance to read myself in Italian again. Also, I want to thank, so that's one thanks to Manuel Orazzi, who is doing with Quod Libet, I think, a great job of saving print media from desolation and disappearance, keeping architecture alive through print media, which I think is really important. Second thing, also to Stefano, who is my cultural ambassador in Milano, and for arranging to meet with his class. I teach students like yourselves in the United States, and it's important that one reciprocate. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm in a class of Stefano's, and there are students here ready to ask questions, so that's important. I want to thank also the head of the school and the Triennale for hosting this. I've been many times at the Politecnico, both at Bovisa and at Leonardo da Vinci, and I always feel important when I'm here to be part of the university. I'm going to show a project that we're working on in Milano that was done together with Lorenzo degli Esposti and his architectural firm here in Milano, and who used to be with me in New York, and that's how we got together. And another Italian architect, Guido Zuliani, who teaches at Cooper Union. The three of us together worked on this project. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. There is a certain nostalgia that I have about being in Italy and being in Milano and now building in Milano. That's very important to me. As you know, I did some work on Terragni. I've been working on Piranesi. I'm doing a book on Palladio. I'm doing a book on Alberti. So I have wide-ranging interest in theoretical and historical things that deal with this country in particular. I want to, I'm going to run through the slides very quickly, but I want to say something that has always been very important to me, was something that Manfredo Tafuri said to me before he passed, and that was, Peter, he said, all of your theoretical work will be for nothing if you don't build buildings. No theoretical, historical person will be interested in you as a theoretician, because I'm not an art historian, I'm not a scholar, I'm an architect. And he said, as an architect, you can think all you want, you can write all you want, you can teach all you want, you got to build. And so it's a lesson that I think is very important, that you have to be able to build. I don't think you have to be able to build a lot. Some people think they have to have 200-person offices and build 50 buildings a year. Several of my best colleagues have come to our university in recent days, and they give a lecture showing 50 different buildings. And yet this is what I'm doing this year. And of course I say to myself, can you have 50 different ideas in 1 year, or even one idea that is able to be done 50 times? Now with computers, from what I understand, you can do 50 variations by pushing a button and get 50 different buildings. To me, that's not what architecture is about. So I'm going to show quickly one building, development of one building that's under construction in Piazza Carlo Erba in Milano. There are other buildings in our office that are under work, but I'm not here to give a travelogue, but merely to be part of this discussion. So just as a way of introduction, we'll just look quickly at one building. It's a condominium project. It had three very important limitations. One was the specific site that we were involved in, which was a triangular site near the Leonardo da Vinci is over there. And it's a triangular site, difficult site. Number two, we were limited to 34 meters in height because of the flight path to Linate. And number three, we were limited by certain restrictions of the site in terms of relationship to adjacent properties. We started with different models of the volumetric units that we had to get on the site. What were the alternatives to a perimeter block? And these physical blocks represent the number of units that we had to get on the site. Some of these are much more radical than we ended up with, but they also don't make very good apartment units or buildings. And clearly they are typologically outside of what was possible. So we started to work with the slide on the picture on the left. Those were the number of units we needed, and that was a perimeter block solution. We found out that typologically that would work, but zoning-wise, we couldn't get those kinds of units. We had to push in and down, and therefore we wouldn't have the number of units that were required. And so we came to a form on the right, which is morphologically very different than the usual block configuration, but also it takes into account the public space that was adjacent to the site across, and also the configuration of the site. We attempted to do vertically a three-part organization which is typical of many of the Milan blocks. You see in the model on the right a base, a horizontal base of stone, a piano nobile in the middle, and a serrated roof structure on the top with what we would call urban villas on top of the project, and a grid that frames the top. So you have different ideas of the history of Milano. We were very much influenced by some of the early 20th century developments, and still to get something that displaces the existing typology, using the typology and displacing it at the same time. And you begin to see in these diagrams the beginning with the perimeter block, and we had the vincolato at the corner, which we couldn't build over, so you take that away from 1 to 2, and then you get 3, you have to move the rear element back because we didn't have enough distance, and then you have to move the rear element in, as in diagram 4, because it was too close to the edge and too close to the limitations enforced by the diagonal from the opposite street. And then 5, you can see, again, you push back, and to get the dimension necessary between units. In 6, you see, again, we had to chop off the corner. And you can see where this is going, that we continue to lose units from the idea of a perimeter block association. And then we got to something like number 8, which joined together all of those pieces in one line, that is from front to back. And we realized that it would be better in terms of the organization of the project to take that line and make it a smooth curve. And the rhythm that you see, there is a rhythm that beats through AAA, B, AA, B, AA, B, AA, and so on. So there's an end rhythm, a middle rhythm, and an end rhythm to the unit organization. And then, so we said in 13 would be a flat slab. If we could put a flat slab on the site, that'd be the number of units we have. 13A takes that flat slab and bends it. 15 distorts that flat slab with a piano nobile and twists the slab off. And you can see the same twisting happens from the piano nobile in the block that we have, and the two blocks don't sit quite over each other, which has to do with my whole theory of close reading and complexity theory, which is part of the work that I've been doing for a long time. So it's not just a simple curve, or two curves, but several. And then you get this rhythm on the top, where we have what we call the urban villas. In slide 37, I'm not giving you all the slides because we spent a lot of time, finding ways of organizing this. You can see the voids in 37A are the stair towers that allow you to get up from the ground and the parking to the top. And then you see from 37A to 41, we introduced the tripartite organization in 41, and in 42 we introduced that same organization in the building that we end up with. And you can see in the site plan the relationship to the triangular site. There's a park on the left-hand side which opens onto the space in front of the building. I always was taught as a classically thinking architect, that buildings have fronts and backs. As they have beginning, middle, and ends, they have fronts and backs. Buildings without a front and a back are lines. There are no lines in architecture. Hilbersheimer's buildings, for me, have no fronts and backs, and therefore they're not buildings, but lines. And one has to avoid the idea of the line. The front is always important. The front is usually flat, and the back usually serrated, and so it was part of the occupation of this project to make a front and a back. And we did that with several ways, which we'll talk about. You can see the kind of notation on the plan and the sections. And of course, since the top slab does not fall directly over the lower slab, you have to make about 80 different sections as you go through, because there's not one section that stands for all the other sections. And of course, the contractors and people constructing who are here understand full well the small complexities that we're involved in. This is an architecture of something not only of complexity, but also of what I call close attention. You need, Walter Benjamin once said that architecture is viewed by people in a state of distraction. You cannot be distracted and watch this and see this architecture. You have to pay attention. A lot of people today question the notion of close attention. They're more interested in atmosphere and affect, in one-liners due to the media, the excess of media, and Twitter and Facebook and instant messaging and email, Gmail, whatever kind of mail. And so they need things boiled down to something fast. No one speaks languages anymore. They just write sounds. And so we were trying to restore architecture to something that we believe in this project. You can see the kinds of drawings we had. The section, you can see in section how the building sits, even with the piano nobile, slightly off of one element. There is a computer drawing, and how we distinguish front and back in the computer drawing is we'll notice the grid of steel elements that frame the top two layers. There's the piano nobile is clear, then there's a two-floor layer of gridded elements, and then there are 3 floors of the urban villas. But you'll notice that the columns that frame, that are part of the framing system, push forward of the solid mass. And so on the front of the building, the columns frame the solids, and on the back, this is the exact same thing, but the columns are pushed into the mass, and so the mass itself is pushed forward, and you get a completely different reading. The exact same window structure, mullions, relationships are completely different when you read the building from the front and you read it from the back, because of the offset of the steel grid. And so you get 2 different readings of the same building. Here's a rendering of the project from across the street, the park that's across the street, and how it opens into the impression into our building. For us, the notion of transformation, of type, of model, of historical phenomena is what makes a city grow. And one of the things that's interesting to me is when you see the difference between 17th century Milan, 18th century, 19th century, 20th, and now 21st century, you see a city in evolution and in growth. We would like to suggest that our project participates in that evolutionary cycle, cycle that's maybe very different from other cities in Italy that didn't have as much damage in the war, but there's no question that Milano is a city of today and participates in today, and we would like to see this project as part of that development. Here is the backside of the project, and there will be obviously a coloration to the stone at the bottom, which is different than the stone at the top and different than the framing elements. And you see the shadow line cast by the what we call the piano nobile, and it's a modest project. It does small things. It's not crazy. It's very livable. It's meant to be lived in a very generous sort of way. The ceilings are larger than usual developmental projects, or higher. The kinds of configurations of apartments, practically every apartment is different because of the configuration of the general massing. Here, a picture of the construction. We were out today. The building is up to its full 9 stories. These were taken earlier, but there's a certain sense of dynamic quality when you're at the space, and it's dynamic in relationship to the blocks that are next to it, and that's very important. We couldn't have done this project like this if the blocks had been all figural, but we needed to make a figural gesture in an area where there were mostly perimeter blocks.